Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to Season 3 of the Logical Christian Podcast. I'm your Logical Christian, Dan Irwin. The Logical Christian Podcast is not here to tell you what to think. It's an exercise in how to think. Rather than just accept what we're being told with regard to current events, politics, science, religion, and everything else, we're going to stop the spin, ask questions, dive deep, and look at the world logically. And since logic is a gift from God, most importantly, we're going to look at it all as Christians. Links can be found in the show notes if you'd like to follow along. So with that, let's go be logical Christians. How many times have you heard someone ask, or maybe you've asked yourself, if what you were just told is actually in the Bible? There's a lot of confusion by the general population as to who said what and when and where. A lot of phrases we're very familiar with that have their roots in the Bible and we have no idea. A lot of phrases we're sure are in there and are definitely not and never have been. In fact, I'd argue that the population at large, including a large percent of those claiming to be Christians, have no idea what's really in the Bible or if it can even be trusted. And that's probably suboptimal. On today's episode, first we're going to see if we can spot the errors, then we're going to realize that we're likely here right now for such a time as this, and finally we'll feel some camaraderie with the wilderness wandering Jews. So, put on your listening ears and take off those angry eyes, you look ridiculous. Then get ready to take notes on what's really going on, and finally put on your best wandering sandals and floppy hat. Don't want to get a sunburn, because as the good book says, here we go. Do you ever read the Babylon Bee? You know, the online Christianish satire website. Now, I say Christianish because not everything they write and post is necessarily Christian by topic or nature. A lot of it is. And I've heard them speak. They're kind of your typical semi-squishy evangelis in their theology, although will admit I haven't heard anything that would make me believe that they aren't saved. Anyway, the website is mostly hilarious, and you don't even need to read the articles, really, although I guess we probably all should. I mean, they put the work into them. But in a lot of cases, the headline and just the meme that they create to go with that headline, no, that's worth the price of admission alone. If you don't read it, you really should. If you can't read it, you're probably my parents who openly refuse to indulge in the internet age. Are they old? Yes, they are. Are they less informed because they don't have the internet? Maybe. Are they happier? Probably not. They still have cable. Do they spend their time more wisely on other things? Yeah, most definitely. But they can't read the Babylon Bee, and that's sad. What's scary is that it's becoming more and more difficult to determine what's satire and what's not, and what's prophecy, in fact. Difficult to the point that I've been fooled a few times myself until I looked closer and realized, oh, I'm getting a little upset over a satire article, and they've actually had their joke, made-up satire posts fact-checked by leftist liberal fact-checkers. You simply do not fact-check a joke. But here we are. This is the world we live in. Anyway, they're doing something here over the last year that's kind of turned into a series of articles, whether that's intentional or not, of the new fill-in-the-blank politician Bible translation, and here are the top 10 verses. Now, as a lead-in to our main article in question, let's look at what they've created over the last year, shall we? I've got 4 of these. They're all linked in the notes. I'm pretty much just going to read what they wrote. It'll be quicker, and there's just not much I need to add. They do a good job. And if you've been awake over the last year, these should really mostly be self-explanatory. You'll get, I think, most of this. So, all of these are found on thebabylonbee.com. Headline number 1, Glory be, there's a new Joe Biden Bible translation, and here are the top 10 verses.
In the most exciting Bible news since 1611, Zondervan announced today a new Joe Biden version of the Scriptures. All the books of the Bible have been translated into Joe Biden's native tongue in hopes that the president and others with dementia can finally understand the Word of God. Here are 10 of the most popular verses from the newest translation of the Bible.
John 3:16. For God so loved, the thing, that he gave his only, or anyway. Revelation 13:18. Let he who hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 600 million, billion, 660, the 100, 60 billion, 100 million, and 6. John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was true in natural pressure. Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. End of quote. Repeat the line. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Believe me, I was there. I used to drive an 18-wheeler through the Garden of Eden. Matthew 23:23. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you dog-faced pony soldiers. Judges 3:21. Ehud reached with his left hand, drew the sword from his right thigh, and plunged it into the king's belly. And then he said, Listen, fat. Exodus 3:10. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Mexico. Matthew 6:15. But if you do not forgive others their trespasses, then you ain't black. Matthew 19:14. Let the little children come unto me, because, well, I got hairy legs that turn blonde in the sun, and the kids used to come up and reach into the pool and rub my legs down so it was straight and watch the hair come back up again. Wow. Powerful stuff. It's so inspiring. It makes you want to... Well, anyway.
See? I told you they were good. Moving on. Headline, Amen and Amen. Check out the top 10 verses from the new Donald Trump Bible translation.
Huge news. Zondervan has unveiled the Donald Trump version of the Bible, finally giving freedom-loving Americans the chance to hear God's Word in the most beautiful, tremendous way ever. The Babylon Bee has obtained an advance copy and can reveal the 10 most inspiring verses.
John 11:35. Jesus wept, which I have never done, by the way, never wept, not a weeper. Nehemiah 6:15-16. So the wall, the big beautiful wall, was finished on the 25th day of the month. Finished in just 52 days. Everyone said I couldn't do it, but I did. Our enemies were shocked, believe me, and the Babylonians paid for it. Leviticus 19:27. Do not cut the hair at the size of your head, but rather let it grow long and golden, and swirl it across the top. John 14:2-6. In my Father's house are many rooms, just like Mar-a-Lago rooms, worth a lot more than $18 million, let me tell you that. Mark 1:15. The kingdom of God has come near. Repent and believe the good news, not the fake news like CNN. They're terrible, folks. Daniel 3:1. King Nebuchadnezzar made a golden idol. It was so small, only 60 cubits high, that's what they said. So much smaller than my towers, said. Romans 12:19. Vengeance is mine on the first day back in office, saith Donald Trump. Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, unbelievable plans to bless you bigly, huge blessings, so tremendous. You'll get tired of blessings, believe me. Genesis 3:1. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field. So clever, folks. Lion Lucifer, I like to call him. 2 Corinthians 5:17. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. So much winning. Everyone says so. The power of each verse just jumps right off the page. Go grab your copy of the new translation and drill, baby, drill deep into the text.
Eh? Tell me you didn't shoot a little milk out of your nose, which is really weird because you haven't had milk for a number of days. Anyway, next. Headline, Shout for joy. Here are the top 10 verses from the new Kamala Harris Bible translation.
Nav Press Inc., publisher of The Message, announced the Kamala Harris version of the Holy Bible. It features text lovingly translated by linguists from Indian to Jamaican, back to Indian, then into English, and then into Kamala's version of English. This is the most diverse and equitable Bible yet. Here's a sneak peek at some inspiring verses from an advanced copy.
Psalm 55:22. Cast your burden on the Lord, and you will be unburdened by what has been. Mark 4:39. And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Excuse me, I'm speaking. And the wind ceased, and there was great calm. John 3:16. For God so loved the world, and love is love. And when you think about it, love is when you love something. We should all love something, or sometimes we can love many things. Sometimes love can be big, and sometimes love can be little. There's so much love in love, and when you love love. The love you feel will make you love. Matthew 18:17. And if he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the IRS. And if he refuses to listen even to the IRS, let him be to you as a Republican and a Trump supporter. Acts 2:6. And at this sound the multitude came together, and they were bewildered, because each one was hearing them speak in their own accent. Acts 16:30 through 31. The jailer said, Sirs, what must I do to be saved? They said, I was born into a middle-class family. Romans 6:23. For the wages of sin is death, which shall be taxed at the same rate as unrealized capital gains. Romans 13:1. For all authority comes from Obama, and those in positions of authority have been placed there by him. Galatians 5:1. It is for freedom Christ has set us free. 2 Timothy 4:13. When you come, bring a coffee cup, but not the one with the white lid, because my lipstick gets all over it. Can we do something about the lid? Wow, this is sure to prick your heart. We did it, Joe.
She's just the worst. I think we can all agree on that. And if you don't agree, you're wrong. And in this case, it's quite simply not okay to be wrong. Okay, one more. The latest addition to the Bible Translation Collection. You can probably guess who. Headline, Rejoice! The Tim Walls Bible translation has arrived, and here are the top 10 verses.
Just in time for Election Day, the Tim Walls Bible translation is ready to hit the shelves. That's right, you can now read through the Bible with every verse revised as though it were filtered through the mind of the governor of Minnesota himself. Though the book itself is not yet available for purchase, the Babylon Bee has obtained an exclusive copy and has compiled the following list of the top 10 verses.
1 Corinthians 6:9, do not be deceived, neither to the sexually immoral, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who practice homosexuality shall be denied my private cell phone number. Matthew 5:6, blessed are those who burn down the black-owned businesses for racial justice, for they shall be bailed out. Psalm 23:4, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Okay, so I misspoke about actually walking through the actual valley. I got my dates mixed up. Matthew 25:40, I tell you the truth, whatever tampons you give to the least of these, you give those tampons to me. Exodus 20:16, thou shalt not bear false witness unless you're just like, oh shucks, I was just such a knucklehead. Then it's cool. Matthew 19:14, let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for the gay students club I start at meets in my classroom after school every Wednesday. Joshua 1:9, be strong and courageous, do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for you can abandon your fellow soldiers and go back home before the war starts. Psalm 63:4, so I will bless you as long as I live. In your name I will lift up my hands and flap them frantically while doing high leg kicks. Exodus 22:2, if a thief is found breaking in, he is not guilty of sin, for he is only peacefully protesting. 1 John 4:4, for he, him who is in you is greater than he, him who is in the world. It can truly be said that the Bible is the most amazing and widely read book in human history, but this translation promises to be the weirdest version yet.
Pretty good, right? Well, I know that following up something like that with something serious is probably not the best choice, but again, here we are. See, this is satire, but as with everything the Babylon Bee does, by the very nature of satire itself, the joke is not very far from the reality. If you've been following my Hear Them Roar miniseries, this is exactly, this is more or less what's being done with the female characters in the Bible. They're being manipulated. The Bible's being manipulated to make it say what we want it to say rather than read for what it actually says. We do, from time to time, need to infer what's not stated clearly and specifically in the Bible. That's true. But to do that, we must be very careful not to contradict anything else that's clearly stated in the Bible. In other words, when we read the Bible and we come to a point where we must make a logical leap, we must ensure that we don't violate the Bible in order to interpret the Bible. On a broader measure, this is what happens everywhere, all the time. We like to kind of create our own little world defining what we consider to be acceptable, what we consider to be unacceptable, right? This is in language that we use, actions, entertainment, political beliefs, religious beliefs, family, work ethics, just everything. At the same time, we tend to look at our lives in the unbiblical worldview of, hey, at least I'm not as bad as that guy. And look, I mean, I'm as guilty, likely more so than you of doing this. I'm not throwing stones here. Trust me on that. In fact, this entire podcast is really me doing some sort of comparative analysis between what I deem acceptable and what I don't. This is why I try to bring these various segments back to the Bible, some more so, some less, but that's my goal, to at least anchor what I'm saying to the Bible. But to do so, I start by looking at the world I believe should exist and compare it to what I'm seeing, and then I make a judgment call. In doing so, I admit that in many cases I'm more or less a hypocrite. This is where repentance comes in, not as a license to sin, but as an honest admission of failure. Again, in the same way. Again. I wish this wasn't so, but it is, and God made a way through His Son for us to maintain communion and fellowship with our Creator, even though we do this. But back to the point at hand, these societal buckets we've created allow us to look at others and say, see, I'm not like that guy, which has the rebound effect of, well, look how good I am, which I would be proud of if I wasn't so unbelievably, incredibly humble. This rebound effect can blind us to our true nature, our fallenness, our need to come to Christ on a regular basis and place ourselves back in our proper position, a created creature who struggles with human nature and who needs a perfect Savior. And the worse the bucket, the more potential rebound. That's not to say there aren't worse sins than others. Yes, I know the typical Christian line is a sin is a sin. And yes, that is true. A single sin, large or small, committed against a holy, holy, holy God is enough to condemn us to an eternity in hell. But within the world of sins, I think we can all agree that, murder is worse than a lie. Now, are there levels of hell based on degrees of sinfulness? Maybe not. Maybe not Dante's levels, but I tend to believe that the Bible gives us enough information to justify saying that there will be a variety of punishment levels, for lack of a better term. I mean, I can't believe that a Mother Teresa, who by her own words gives every indication that she did not understand salvation or the gospel, would be in eternal punishment the exact same as, and let's go to our go-to person, Hitler. Right? Now, don't misunderstand, however, because even if that's true, and there are levels, the best possible level of hell will still be worse than anything we could possibly imagine. Okay, so with all that, to our article to illustrate my point, found on theblaze.com, headline, Satanists worship Satan for real, whether they believe it or not. So the Blaze has been putting out a lot of religion-based articles lately, which is their prerogative. Some are better than others. Some are simply terrible. Glenn Beck, who started the Blaze, keep in mind, a Mormon, so again, not someone who could be saved right now as he doesn't believe in the Jesus of the Bible, which is the most vital part of salvation. Well, he's been becoming more and more ensconced in religious matters lately, which is good in a way, but he's surrounding himself with experts that at best have a very squishy religion, and they don't seem to have the spine to dare tell Glenn that he's wrong in his belief system, and that's bad. So when he or the Blaze delve into religious matters, I tend to become a little bit hypercritical, probably. The article in question is actually just kind of a roundup of how other leftist news sources are trying to frame the Satanic Temple, of all things. See, the author names the Washington Post, PolitiFact, The Economist, The Atlantic, and The Guardian all as news sites who are applauding the Satanic Temple for various reasons. They're champions of women's rights, including her right to choose, and although they never seem to finish that sentence fragment, allow me, her right to choose to murder her unborn baby if she feels like it, including their telehealth system, including abortion care. They purport to believe in the freedom of religion, and even the Founding Fathers couldn't disagree with that, right? They're pushing back against the horrific encroachment of Christianity on society, rebelling against all of those just terrible Christian-y values and morals and ethics. Ick. They're doing the Lord's, they're doing the Dark Lord's work. And the Satanic Temple is fighting the political right, the Republicans. Fun fact, the Satanic Temple has endorsed Harris for 2024. So, go ahead and let that sink in for just a second. They agree with the LGBTQIA2+ community. They love getting into schools with after-school Satan clubs. They're Black Lives Matters advocates. They love them some socialism and social justice. They're pro-vaccine and pro-science. Keep in mind, their definition of science is one of a godless world, which without God there is no science. They fight to get those pesky 10 Commandments off the wall, or the monuments of such off of the lawn. Well, Satanists actually claim they don't worship anything. They're non-theists. They don't believe in an actual Satan. They don't worship a being named Satan. They claim to believe that all religion is a myth, which includes Satan, and really only worship the concept of the Satan character, the myth of Satan, that rebellious nature and mischievousness of the creature. They worship the concept of Satan as the freedom fighter, breaking free from all of the religious silliness, opting instead for scientific inquiry and discovery, because as we all know, science and religion are two completely different things, he says sarcastically. One of the modern Democrat heroes, think Obama through today, is Saul Alinsky. He was a community activist and organizer, just like Barry Obama, and a Marxist, just like Barry. His book, Rules for Radicals, which the leftists of Obama's generation, and younger for sure, some of the older generations as well, he wrote a dedication to Satan, whom he called, quote, the original rebel. See, he may not believe in a literal Satan. I have no idea. I mean, well, look, he's dead now, so yes, he absolutely believes in a literal Satan now. But he loved the concept of Satan at the time, pushing back against that angry, lightning bolt hurling, law-heavy sky god, who I'm sure he probably also believed was a myth. So the author goes on to outline the evil that's promoted and supported by the Church of Satan, the Satanic Temple, and the like, and then says that Satan is a destroyer. He wants to, quote, eradicate the value of human life, which stands at the core of God's creation. Okay, I don't know about that exactly phrased that way. I'd say that Satan wants to destroy humanity because humans are image bearers of God and Satan hates God. But okay, I mean, I'll give him that. He quotes John 8:44, which states that Satan was a murderer from the beginning, and that's just what he does, and yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that. He says that Satan is a horrible accomplice. Quote, just ask Judas. I don't think Judas was thinking he was creating a pact with Satan, but yeah, I mean, point taken. And he quotes Paul as saying that Satan blinds the minds of the unbelievers. And then he wraps up his article with this, quote, but despite the Satanist chaos and noise, the Christian message is simple but profound. Love and life, rooted in God's truth, will always triumph over the forces of chaos and death. Satan offers nothing but division and death. Christ offers redemption and love. Okay, look, I mean, that's fine, I guess. I'd say that Christ's sacrifice has already conquered death, that Satan is a fallen angel and can do nothing that God doesn't allow him to do, although a lot of Christians feel very icky about saying something like that. I'd say that Christ offers salvation. Basically, I think I'd probably clean up that statement a bit, but that's not really the point here. Ken Ham, and I've mentioned this before, Ken Ham, the founder of Answers in Genesis, says in nearly all of his presentations that there are only two religions. There's God and there's not God. Not God, for all intents, is a worship of the adversary, Satan. For those who are not saved by the blood of Christ, as spoken of in the Christian Bible, not an add-on like the Book of Mormon, not any other so-called Christian text, they are worshiping a false Christ, a false God. They're worshiping a Satan. Satan. You don't have to be a Satan worshiper to worship Satan. You don't have to be a member in good standing of the Satanic Temple to be a Satan worshiper. You must simply lack salvation. Buddhists, Muslims, atheists, agnostics, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, Catholics, and Jews are all de facto worshiping Satan because they are not worshiping the God of the Bible in the way prescribed in the Bible through Jesus Christ. Now, we can rearrange the biblical text or make it say what we'd like to in order to fit what we want it to. We can compartmentalize our lives. We can place people in various buckets of badness so we can compare them to other people in other buckets and to ourselves in our own bucket. But the bottom line is that we're either worshiping God or we're worshiping not God. And what about those of us who are saved? Those who are truly saved, God's elect, and take that how you will, are in the closed hand of Jesus, which is in the closed hand of the Father, so no man, not even ourselves, can pluck us out of that grip. If we are truly saved, we will never be unsaved. But what or who do we worship on a daily basis? Thank God, literally, that the blood of Jesus covers us in righteousness, so the Father sees the righteousness of the Son when he looks at us. But on a daily basis, what do we look at? What do we think about? What do we say or read or watch or do? On a daily basis, most of us will sin prior to setting our foot on the floor as we get out of the bed in the morning, especially with the advent of the smartphone or maybe the TV hanging on the wall across the room with the remote on the nightstand. But for the few who make it upright prior to sinning, well, you're only seconds away. Placing anything before God is a sin. It's worshiping, and I use that term somewhat loosely, the ruler of this world. The difference between Satanists, atheists, Catholics, Mormons, Muslims, Buddhists, and all the rest, and the blood-bought, born-again Christian is exactly that, the blood of Christ, applied to our account, paying the debt of sin we have accrued, are accruing, and will accrue. But on a daily basis, all of us sin. All of us turn to the ruler of this world and say, well, maybe I'll have just a small bit of that. Now, as a Christian, we must be on our guard not to tweak or interpret the Bible in a way we'd like. Subtly, not like the Babylon Bee, of course, but just a little bit here or there. We must be careful not to try to justify ourselves by comparing ourselves with the selves of others. There's always someone worse than me or you, which means we're good, right? The phrase, incidentally not found in the Bible, "there but for the grace of God go I," is very applicable here. If we hate in our heart, we're murderers. And I can tell you that as a man, closely following politics, this is a difficult one for me. If we look with lust, we've committed adultery. And as a man, in the world today especially, I can tell you that this is a difficult one for me. And we can walk our way down the list of sins. And as a man, in this world today, I can tell you that, these are all difficult ones for me. So I guess, be on your guard. Be in the Word. Know what it says, not what you think it says or what you think it should say. Be on your knees, literally or figuratively. There's no magic invoked by your prayer posture. Stay in communion with God. Keep your conscience clear. Confess and ask for guidance, help, the spirit of power, love, and self-control that we're promised. And as you look at this world and shake your head in disgust, as I do multiple times a day, keep in mind that the only difference between us and them is literally the saving grace and forgiveness of Jesus Christ. When I say the word Purim, either as Purim or as Purim, what does that make you think of? How does it make you feel? What if I added the festival of to the front of Purim or Purim? Okay, what if I added in the name Esther and told you that we're now in part 6 of our Hear Them Roar mini-series, a look at how the humanist world views, or would like to view, the female characters in the Bible as told in a series of articles from 2008. So if you've ever tried to read the Bible in a year, and you're like most people, you've no doubt at least one time quit around February as you run into the brick wall that goes by the name of Leviticus. So many laws and rituals, sacrifices, feasts, etc., etc. I mean, come on. Seriously, though, there are sections of some of those first books that can be a real slog, especially for us Gentiles. Out of all the feasts and festivals and celebrations, Purim is one of 2 that did not have its origination in God's giving of the law to Moses, Hanukkah being the other one. I'll let you look up the reason behind Hanukkah. We're going to focus our attention on Esther and the resulting holiday of Purim. I think let's break the little tradition we've had going, and let's work our way through this article, correcting it with the actual biblical account as we go, rather than working through both kind of on separate tracks, basically due to the length of the story. And please know that when I say story, I don't mean a fairy tale. I mean the literary account, the historical account of the events surrounding the book of Esther. So, to start, unlike the women discussed thus far, Esther is not just a small handful of mentions and a few verses. Esther is her own book in the Bible, 10 chapters long, something like 170-ish verses. Because of the thorough telling of this account, it's harder for some of these authors and scholars to turn this into what it definitely isn't. But that's not stopping them from trying. So, found on usnews.com from 2008, headline, Esther has shown Jews how to survive persecution. Subtitle, a clever heroine. Okay, not bad. The author, one Ms. Beth Brophy, as I already stated, gets the general story mostly correct, kind of because she has to. The issue we have in this retelling is the point of the story. So the premise, of course, is that this may or may not actually be a real historical account. That's an argument that's gone on and will continue to go on. She quotes yet another biblical scholar, Carrie Moore, emeritus professor of religion at Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania, as saying that this is, quote, more like a novella than a historical account. Ms. Brophy says that many scholars see this account, quote, as a work of literary fiction. Okay, why? Well, because first, God is never mentioned in the book of Esther, but neither does the book of Song of Solomon, and nobody, at least that I've heard, would call that a work of literary fiction. And look, yes, I know, it's a song, it's poetry, it's slightly different than what we're saying Esther is. But let's get to our professor's credit. He did say that although it doesn't mention God directly, we do see him, quote, in the wings, guiding the plot. Agreed. Second, there are no miracles or other events that could be classified as supernatural in this book. But then again, there are a number of other books that also don't contain supernatural or miraculous events. Now, before I go any further, our biblical scholar professor here only has one other quote at the end of the article, one I will mention when I get to it at the end of this segment. And unlike most biblical scholars who seem to believe the Bible less and less the more scholarly they get, again, I wouldn't say that he's wrong. And to be honest, we probably shouldn't speak ill of the very, very recently deceased. In fact, he just died at the end of September, just over a week ago, by the time this episode drops at least, at the ripe old age of 94. He looked like a nice man, I'll just be honest. I just found that to be kind of ironic that here we are, and apparently there he went, exit stage right, as it were. Hopefully he was indeed saved and is now settled into paradise with his Savior and all the wonders that entails. Anyway, that dope set... No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. What this article failed to mention is the fact that Esther not only doesn't mention God, it doesn't contain anything that could be considered supernatural or miraculous, but it also doesn't refer to the law of God, or sacrifices, worship, or prayer. It also isn't referred to, quoted, or alluded to in the New Testament, but then again, neither is the Song of Solomon, Obadiah, nor Nahum. So that argument doesn't hold much watered-down non-alcoholic wine either. To be honest, except for the fact that it's in the Bible and it concerns the Jewish nation, it's really a fairly secular book, all things considered. What comes off as funny to me is that these scholars who look at this as a fictional tale illustrating a point, basically a parable, because it doesn't mention God nor does it have supernatural events, are quite likely the same scholars, at least in part, who mock the idea of an all-powerful sky god who does miracles and causes supernatural events. Pretty much you're dag-nabbited if you do and dag-nabbited if you don't, I guess. We don't know the author of the book of Esther. Scholars have suggested that maybe Mordecai, who is Esther's uncle, we'll meet him very soon. Ezra or Nehemiah, those could be the author. But there's no way to know for sure, at least on this side of glory, at least right now. As John MacArthur says in his summary of the book of Esther, quote, whoever penned Esther possessed a detailed knowledge of Persian customs, etiquette, and history, plus particular familiarity with the palace at Susa. He also exhibited intimate knowledge of the Hebrew calendar and customs, while additionally showing a strong sense of Jewish nationalism, possibly a Persian Jew who later moved back to Israel, wrote Esther. So this book takes place around 480 BC, the same basic period of time as Ezra and Nehemiah, as well as some others, during the Persian-dominated era of that region. This takes place just after the 70-year captivity of the Jews by the Babylonians, when Jerusalem was decimated. Esther takes place between the first and the second wave of Jews returning to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple in the city. The book starts with the king Ahasuerus in his capital city of Susa, holding a 180-day feast for, quote, all his princes and servants, the military officers of Persia and Media, and the nobles and the princes of his provinces. This was all basically to show his glory and his riches. That seems, I don't know, excessive, kind of. But I've never been a king, so maybe that's what you do. Then after 180 days of partying, well, can't just go cold turkey, so he held a 7-day party for everyone in Susa with an open bar, of which the king also partook, obviously. Now he had a queen, Queen Vashti, and on day 7 of the 7-day after party, so after 187 days of partying, being probably pretty schnockered at this point, he decided that he's shown everyone everything else, he might as well show him his queen. Although there are a few suggested reasons why she refused the king's request, I think the most common assumption is that basically when he ordered that she come there with her royal crown, he quite likely meant only her royal crown, or something along those lines. Whatever the reason, she refused. He got mad and asked his advisors what the law said should be done with her for refusing a direct order. They said that if word got out that this woman defied the king, women all over the kingdom would think it was okay to rebel against their husbands. So they convinced the king to write a decree that could never be repealed, that would banish Vashti from coming into the presence of the king forever. That'll show those women that they better just stay in line. And that decree is still making would-be rebellious women the world over think twice before getting all uppity, even today. Anyway, once the king sobered up, he of course regretted what he had done, but it was too late because of their stupid rules that once a decree was made, it could never be unmade. So now he's all depressed, of course. So his advisors come up with a plan. Bring in all the young, beautiful virgins from all over the land to Susa and give them to his eunuch to get them all dolled up, and the king can take his pick of who will be the next queen. Shockingly, the king liked that idea. Who would guess? Back to our article. After the queen's banishment, quote, to find a new queen, the king announces an ancient Persian version of American Idol, a national search for suitable young virgins. Esther is an orphan who is being raised by her cousin Mordecai. She joins the harem as a contestant, spends a year beautifying herself, and takes her cousin's advice about keeping her Jewish heritage a secret. The king falls for her and crowns her. Now, yes, the king does choose Esther. First, this wasn't an American Idol thing, and the way our author phrases this makes it sound like Esther was wanting to be queen. I think the implication from the Bible is that these young women weren't really given so much a choice. They were just gathered and brought, I believe the words were. They were given to the king's eunuch to keep charge of them and fix them up. And yes, the king falls for her, but in a sort of parallel of the story of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Esther too found favor in the eyes of the eunuch, quote, and the young lady was good in his eyes, and she advanced in loving kindness before him. So he hurried to give her cosmetics and portions of food to her, and to give her 7 choice young women from the king's house, and he transferred her and her young women to the best place in the harem. Now, as for Mordecai's advice, it wasn't really advice at all. The Bible is very clear that he gave Esther a direct command to say nothing about her heritage. That's it. Mordecai, being her parental figure, being her elder, was shown the honor and respect he was to be shown by her obeying his order. Remember, this series of articles have a few purposes, one of which is to ensure that women always come out as strong, independent, empowered females who don't need no man. But as we've talked about many times before, Judaism and Christianity is actually the only system that respects women and holds them as equals in the eyes of God. That said, it also has a hierarchy, male to female, in the family, in the government, in the church, because without some sort of order, without a head, you get pretty much just chaos, which, look at our country today. So Esther, out of respect and because of the rule of law, obeyed Mordecai. She didn't simply decide to take his advice, as the article said. A seemingly small point, but those small points, those little nuances, when added up and piled on top of each other, they add up pretty quick to something that's not correct. Esther, when the time came for her to go before the king, did exactly what the eunuch told her to do. Quote, and Esther advanced in favor in the eyes of all who saw her. When she came to the king, quote, the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she advanced in favor and loving kindness before him more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen in place of Vashti. And again, much like Daniel and the boys, and you're going to want to spell boys with a Z at the end there just to be cool like I am, although the circumstances of her being there were maybe not what she had planned for her life, she didn't forget who she was. She, as we're commanded in the New Testament, worked heartily as for the Lord rather than for men. Now some time went by, and Mordecai overheard a plot by two eunuchs, the king's doorkeepers, to kill the king. Mordecai told Esther, Esther told the king, investigation was done, they were found guilty and hanged. Oh, that our justice system would work this fast with regard to the actually guilty, or that our justice system would really work at all, really. Anyway, digression. The incident was recorded in the King's Chronicles. That becomes important later. Then we move into the meat of the story, the build-up to the climax, if you will, the reason that this story is even included in the Bible. Well, maybe one of the reasons. Look, the king had an advisor, Haman, who was well-liked by the king, and was well-liked by himself as well. So the king advanced him to a very high position, to the point that all the king's servants at the gates were required to bow and even prostrate themselves before him by order of the king. Mordecai spent his time at the gate but refused to bow. The others made Haman aware of this and added in one other little detail. Mordecai was a Jew. Now, why was that such a big deal? Well, because Haman was an Agagite. Why is that a big deal? Okay, well, this has to do with a grudge, a hatred for each other going back over 550 years. In the book of 1 Samuel, Saul had been anointed king. Samuel the prophet relayed a message to Saul from God that he was to take the Israelite army to the Amalekites and utterly destroy them. He was to slaughter man, woman, child, even the newborn baby, and all of the livestock. Now, why? Well, this goes back to Moses and the Exodus, another 500 plus years before that, when the Amalekites fought against the Israelites as they wandered in the wilderness. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord, and 500 plus years after the Amalekites attacked the Israelites, the Lord was going to enact vengeance on the entire population and just wipe them off the map. Which is exactly what Saul, didn't do. No, he slaughtered a lot of things, a lot of people, but he spared the king. We know that for sure. He spared the choice livestock. And since we know the Amalekites show up a little later in the Old Testament, we know that Saul did not kill everyone and everything. Well, Samuel comes back, finds that Saul had not done as he was told. God rejected Saul as king because of his blatant disobedience. Samuel had the king brought to him, and he hacked the king by the name of Agag to pieces. Haman was an Agagite. So even though David later finished the job of wiping out the Amalekites, apparently the line of Agag wasn't extinguished, I guess. And just so we're clear, yes, look, I know there's a legitimate argument that Haman wasn't a descendant of Agag the king. In reality, I don't believe we could ever prove it one way or the other, but it would absolutely explain Haman's hatred toward the Jews as an ethnic group rather than just Mordecai as an individual. The Bible says, quote, "Then Haman saw that Mordecai was not bowing down or prostrating himself before him, so Haman was filled with wrath. But he despised in his eyes to send forth his hand against Mordecai alone, for they had told him who the people of Mordecai were. Therefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus." He could have hated the Jews because of Mordecai, sure. But knowing that Saul failed in his obedience, it's well more possible relatives of Agag got away. From the context we get in Esther, making a point that Haman is an Agagite, that Haman hates the Jews, and Mordecai also seems to have a problem with Haman that goes beyond the bowing thing. I believe that Haman and Mordecai are mortal enemies from 500 plus years ago and 500 plus years before that. Okay, enough of that rabbit trail, back to our story. So Haman wants to kill Mordecai. Haman tells the king of a people interspersed within the land who do not follow his laws, and hey, why not let me just exterminate them, eh? What do you say? And the king said yes. King agreed. Do what you want to with them. It's amazing the king treated genocide so flippantly. I mean, if his top guy wants them all dead, good by me. So a decree was written and sent through all the lands of the king that on one day coming up, the 13th day of the 12th month, the citizens shall rise up as one and kill every Jewish man, woman, and child, kind of reminiscent of the command God gave Saul, wouldn't you say? And then plunder all that they have. Back to our article. Our author sums up the next chapter pretty well, actually. Quote, hearing of Haman's plot, Mordecai goes into mourning, wearing sackcloth and ashes. He begs Esther to go to the king and save her people. Esther balks. For anyone, even a wife, to appear before the king unsummoned can be punishable by death. Mordecai persists. Esther's silence won't protect her from the pogrom, he says. What's more, he says perhaps she was made queen for this very reason, to save her people. Finally, she agrees to approach the king, although she knows she may die for her efforts. If I perish, she says. And yes, that's all true, but good grief, the author missed her chance at quoting the one line that everyone seems to want to say about everyone in the current moment all the time. Quote, and who knows whether you have not reached royalty for such a time as this. Oh well, Ms. Brophy, opportunity lost, huh? She also neglects to show the faith in God that Mordecai had. Per his statement just prior, he says, quote, for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. See, he made it clear to Esther that if this genocide happens, well, she'll be caught up in it too, but this will not end the Jews. I'd have to believe that Mordecai was very familiar with the eternal covenant God made with Abraham, that his seed, the Jews, would be God's chosen people forever. If God can't fulfill that promise, he's not really God, is he? You want to know why so many nations through time hate the Jewish people to the point that they want them just wiped from the earth? This is it. This is Satan's only play, at least that I can see. Everything else he does is kind of nickel and diming things, but God made an eternal covenant. If Satan can make God break that promise, well, that means that Satan is stronger than God, right? And yes, look, I know that Gentiles have been grafted in. Does that sort of modify the covenant? I don't know. I don't think so. Admittedly, I could be wrong, but at that time, they were definitely still under that promise, that covenant. It at least appears that Mordecai knew God would not fail to keep his promise, but that doesn't mean that they specifically wouldn't be killed. So, Esther agrees. Now, this is probably our first point where the author, Ms. Brophy, breaks from telling the story to now telling us the point of the story, or at least a few key points that you and I, well, we really need to be aware of from this potentially fictional tale, you remember per humanist interpretation. She gets back to the account after a few paragraphs, but she omits some important information. Brief, but important. We'll cover that. So, citing Sidney White Crawford, not Cindy Crawford, Sidney Crawford, who you may remember as our religion professor from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, who in the story of Zipporah thought maybe that circumcision story of Moses' son meant that women were possibly responsible for conducting the religious rituals in the family, regardless of what the Bible says. As for here, she says that this clearly highlights a theological theme that God typically doesn't come down in lightning and thunder with his instructions, which, yes, I agree with. She goes on, quote, humans must act, even without knowing the outcome of their actions. It's part of human existence. The story is saying, don't be afraid. You won't ever be sure of the will of God. Just do your best. Okay, well, although I guess if you look at that from a very technical view, it's not altogether incorrect, but I can't say I like the way she structured that. We're not to just run into something all willy-nilly and do our best. We're to turn to God, use the resources he's given us, pray to know God's will for us, and then make a decision, knowing that that's the decision we were supposed to make, regardless of outcome. Having faith in God, that all things work together for good for those who are the called according to his purpose. Ms. Brophy then goes on to quote the quote, scholar in residence at the Women's Studies Research Center at Brandeis University. And what the heck does any of that mean? Her name is Penina Adelman. And she says, quote, Esther could have passed as a non-Jew and blended in, but at the crucial time, she stood up for her people in a dangerous situation. See, this is apparently another theme of this narrative, one of assimilation, we're told. And to be honest, I don't know what she means necessarily. I mean, I get what she's saying, and yeah, she could have tried to blend in. Esther could have tried to blend in, but I think Mordecai was right. She'd be found out eventually. But this isn't really about assimilation at all. I mean, yeah, she kept her ancestry a secret as a Jew, and who appears to be possibly royalty as a distant descendant of King Saul, but we have nothing telling us that she, nor Mordecai, nor any of the Jews were just trying to blend in and kind of meld themselves into the masses, which is what assimilation is. We have nothing to indicate that the Jews were being oppressed or hunted down at this time. I mean, yes, they were in captivity, but remember, just a few years earlier, a contingent of the Jews were allowed to go back to Jerusalem and begin to rebuild the temple and the city. That's not what happens to a people who are being massively oppressed and hunted. So our author jumps to Esther being accepted by the king to come in and speak, which, remember, she could have been killed for seeking an audience rather than being summoned. But Ms. Brophy skips something that I think is kind of important. Through their messenger, Esther instructed Mordecai to gather all the Jews in Susa and fast. Fast for 3 days, eat and drink neither night nor day. She and her maidens would do the same, and then she would break the law and go in to see the king. Quote, "And if I perish, I perish." Now, this seems kind of minor, doesn't mention prayer, but fasting would undoubtedly imply prayer as well, as they weren't fasting, just to be hungry. They were fasting to focus their thoughts on God and to seek his favor. Additionally, if the Jews were already being hunted and oppressed, seems that this would be a good way to find out who was being rebellious toward assimilation and take them out. So, after 3 days, Esther stood in the inner court of the king's house. He saw her, beckoned her in, because when he saw her, quote, she advanced in favor in his eyes. You hear that phrase again. And then asked her what her request was. Quote, "Even to half of the kingdom it shall be given to you." I don't know. That's a pretty good offer. Esther then invited the king and Haman to a feast. During the feast, the king asked and offered again. Esther invited them to another feast the next day, and then she said she would tell him. Haman went home, called his buddies, told them to come on over, and then he recounted how special and important he was to both his wife and his friends. But that Mordecai, that guy, will still not bow down to him. So his wife and his friends came up with a solution. We'll build a gallows, I guess, in the backyard, 50 cubits, about 75 feet high, request from the king that Mordecai be hanged on it, and then go to the feast happily. Well, he liked that idea, so he had the gallows made. That same night, the king couldn't sleep, so he had his do-boys bring him the books of the Chronicles, apparently of his time as king. And I don't know how to take this. He couldn't sleep, so he was wanting the Chronicles brought to him and read because he knew they were so boring that he'd conk right out? Or did he want the Chronicles brought to him because he was arrogant and wanted to hear all about himself? Don't know. Whatever the reason, they came to the plot by the eunuchs to kill the king, and how Mordecai had overheard and told the king, saving his life. Well, he was curious, likely because it wasn't stated in the Chronicles, was Mordecai ever rewarded for saving his life? And no, he never had been. Well, right then, Haman came to speak with him about hanging Mordecai on the gallows he had just constructed. So the king allowed him in, but before Haman could get a word out, the king asked him what he would do, were he king, for a man that the king desires to honor. Well, Haman, assuming, and we all know what happens when you do that, assuming the king was speaking about him, he laid it on thick here, put one of the king's royal robes on him, one of the king's personal horses, a royal crown, the person of honor placed on the horse, led through the streets of the city and through the city square by the king's noble princes, and have them cry out as they led this person on the horse, "Thus it shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." Well, the king loved the idea and told Haman to make it so and honor Mordecai. We don't have a record of what Haman said or thought or did at that moment. We just know that Haman did as the king commanded, Haman doing the calling out part as he led the horse. Haman went home in disgrace after this, and his friends, his wise men, they were there again, and they said, quote, "If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the seed of the Jews, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him." Well, that sounds ominous. And before he could say anything, Haman was summoned to the palace for feast number 2. And in a few short verses, Haman's entire world falls apart here. The king asks Esther yet again for her request, yet again offering her half of the kingdom if she so desired. Esther said that her request was for her life and the lives of her people. She said that if they had simply been sold into slavery, she wouldn't have bothered the king. That in itself, if you think about it, is kind of amazing that she said that way. I don't think I could say that way. But she said that they'd been marked for destruction. Now, the king asks who would dare do such a thing, and Esther said, quote, "An adversary and an enemy is this evil Haman." So the Bible goes on to say, quote, "Then Haman became terrified before the king and queen." Yeah, I kind of think that's probably an understatement. I'd imagine all the color drained from his face. I mean, you know the feeling. I know the feeling. Kind of that lightheaded feeling kind of washes over you as your sight starts to narrow into some sort of tunnel vision. All the noises sound distant and you start getting really hot. Then as that kind of, goes away, you come out of the shock, the feeling in the pit of the stomach. And then the realization, at least by Haman, he's a dead man. So the king got up and went into his garden, apparently to count to 10 or 1,000,000 or something, and, because he's pretty enraged. I would have to actually say that's a pretty calm, cool, collected thing the king did. I mean, I don't know that I would have done that. Haman stayed to beg Esther to spare his life, and whether he was drunk or he was trying to worship, I don't know what he was doing, but he wound up falling on Esther, or at least on the couch close to Esther, don't know. Unfortunately for him, right as the king came back in, he saw what happened as Haman was falling over here, and it appears that Haman was assaulting his queen. One of the king's eunuchs told him that Haman had just built a 50-cubit-high gallows in his backyard, apparently, to hang Mordecai, the man who saved his life. And the king finished the thought for him and commanded Haman to be hanged on the gallows, which he was, promptly. Now, things moved quickly at this point, kind of had to. There was some mopping up to do. And the way the laws were structured, as I said before, were stupid. So the king took Haman's house, gave it to Esther. Esther told him who she was, who Mordecai was. They were Jews. The king gave Mordecai his signet ring, the ring that he had given to and now had taken away from Haman. He wasn't going to need it anymore anyway. It's going to be fine. Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman, so he took care of that. Esther then begged the king to rescind the decree to kill the Jews per Haman's plan. But the king couldn't do that. It was impossible, per their laws, for him to rescind a decree. But he had an idea. The king had his scribes come to him, and a new decree was written, one that would go to every city, every province, every government, every kingdom under his control, to all the Jews and non-Jews, that said for one day and one day only, the 12th month, on the 13th day, the Jews had the right to kill anyone, armies, men, women, children, who would try to take their lives, and they could plunder the spoil of those they kill, and they could do all of this with no penalty. One day only. Remember, this was actually the day that Haman had decreed for everyone to kill the Jews with no penalty for one day only. Now, this new decree was written on the 23rd day of the 3rd month, then sent everywhere as fast as the couriers could ride, so the Jews had enough time to prepare to defend themselves. Quote, "And in each and every province, and in each and every city, wherever the king's word and his law reached, there was gladness and joy for the Jews, a feast and a holiday, and many among the peoples of the land became Jews, for the dread of the Jews had fallen on them." So Haman, who wanted the genocide of the Jews, the elimination of the Jews, ended up creating more Jews, many more Jews, through the conversion of Gentiles to the Jewish religion, because, if nothing else, they didn't want to be slaughtered by the Jews. So, to bring this to a close, the fateful day came. There were those who sought to kill the Jews. The Jews were ready for a fight. At the citadel in Susa alone, the Jews killed 500 people, plus the 10 sons of Haman, but they did not plunder those whom they killed. The king relayed this to Esther, asking her what she'd like to do now. She requested that his orders be extended one more day, and the bodies of Haman's sons be hanged on the gallows. So he made it so. The next day, the Jews killed another 300 men in Susa, but again did not plunder. Now, in the rest of the land, a total of 75,000 men seeking to kill the Jews were killed, but the Jews did not plunder. On the next day, as there was no way the king's decree of one more day of killing would make it to all other provinces, there was a day of feasting and gladness among the Jews. Mordecai then decreed that the 14th and 15th day of the month of Adar, the 12th month, would be celebrated annually, days of feasting, sharing of food with one another, and sending gifts to the poor. This is the feast of Purim, celebrated to this day from this allegedly fictional story, right? So Purim is the plural of the word pur, which means lot. From chapter 3 of Esther, we read that the 13th day of the 12th month was determined by Haman as the day of Jewish genocide based on his casting of lots to narrow down the day and the month. He treated the slaughter of the Jews, the ridding of not only Mordecai but his entire people, as a game. So Mordecai turned it around and named the holiday after the game Haman had played with their lives, Purim. Esther, as queen, made it a decree, and so it was. Mordecai was made second to the king, and was and is also considered great among his fellow Jews, seeking the good of and peace for all of his people. The end. What a story, right? Fiction? I think no. Now back to our article. Our religion professor, Crawford, quote, sees the story as teaching readers how to live as a minority within a Gentile society by cooperating with others, but also by protecting and lifting up the Jews. Okay, the Esther story is a warning that anti-Semitism exists. It's a real danger, but as a Jew, you must be prepared to react to it, she notes. Another underlying message is of the dangers of stereotyping. Not all the Gentiles in the story are evil like Haman, Crawford points out. Many of them liked the Jews and came to their defense. All right, we'll come back to this one. Ms. Brophy notes that there are some rabbis who criticize Esther because she didn't follow a kosher diet. We have no way of actually knowing that she married a Gentile. She kind of had little say in that matter, and she was vengeful, hanging Haman's 10 sons, who, look, let me remind you, we're already dead at this point, at least how I read it, but okay, whatever. She also writes that some feminists don't like Esther because she used her beauty and feminine wiles to accomplish her goals, and that the original queen, Vashti, was the feminist heroine because she was strong and defiant, which, I mean, it kind of seems like the goal of a feminist is to be as much unlike a female as possible. That sounds more like a meninist, doesn't it? Our professor, who recently passed away, Mr. Moore, said, quote, Esther embodies feminist ideals. She was brave, courageous, tough, with an imagination equal to the task of saving the Jews. And look, I don't know what a feminist is supposed to be, but I tend to agree with Moore here. Penina, our resident scholar, adds, quote, Esther had the wisdom to get what she wanted from the king, not by being strident or adversarial, which doesn't get you too far. She succeeded where Vashti failed. And okay, I agree with that as well. I'll be honest, I've never been in a position like Esther was in. We're all faced with choices all the time. We're faced with adversity, but I'd wager that none of us have been facing the genocide of our entire people group, define that however you will, with you potentially being the only one able to do something about it. But you might be killed if you try to do so. Esther was strong, courageous, resourceful, as well as feminine and beautiful, and over was stated to have advanced in loving kindness in the eyes of those beholding her. She was, and I would argue is, a woman to be looked up to, even to this day. But the question is, why was she these things? Why was she the way she was? Why was she there for such a time as this? Right? Why is this story absent mention of God and the law and miracles in the Old Testament at all? This is not a story to remind us that anti-Semitism exists. Nobody has ever had any doubt that anti-Semitism exists. They never have. They never will. Since the beginning of the Israelite nation, they've been oppressed and exterminated at every turn. This is not a story about stereotyping. That's stupid. Sorry, Probably shouldn't use that word, but it is. It's stupid. It doesn't even deserve a response. So in 2 minutes, what is the story of Esther about? Well, this book, despite having no mention of God by name, is quite clearly about one thing: God's faithfulness. In this case, God's faithfulness in upholding his covenant promise to his chosen people. Our God is a covenantal God, a faithful God, a God who knows his sheep and they know him. He makes and keeps his promises. At no point, no matter how dire the situation, is God ever absent or helpless. Is God in any way anything other than in absolute, complete control of everything? That's not to say that everything will always work out in a way that we deem to be good or desirable from our very limited view, but we know that all things work for our good and for God's glory. In some cases, our good may not come until eternity, but all things work for good for a born-again child of God. God has made a new covenant since the time of Esther, one that says he will be with us always, a promise that all who come to God through Jesus will be saved. We can trust and believe this God because he's never failed and he never will. He'll never be surprised or caught off guard. He'll never be at a loss or confused. He promises that all who come to him by grace through faith will be saved. The same God who the Jews of Esther's day had faith in is the same God you and I can have faith in as well. The book of Esther is not about feminism or anti-Semitism or stereotyping. The historical, factual account found in the book of Esther simply shows us that God is a faithful, covenant-keeping God who we can and must place our faith, hope, and trust in. So we're into the fourth quarter of the year, which is simply amazing to me. I don't know how you feel about it. You should be, about 3/4 of your way through the Bible, if you're working through it in a year, or maybe 3/8 of your way through it if you're doing it in 2 years like I'm trying to do. Maybe you're on your 10th time through the Bible if you're reading it every month, which, if that's you, more power to you. Or maybe you're still just kind of hanging out in Leviticus where you got to, back in February and you just kind of bogged down a little bit in there. Hey, whatever you're doing, at home, at church, hopefully you're reading, searching, digging, being a Berean. This is chapter 9 of Being Bereans, as a matter of fact, a simple look at some notes that I take on my mostly daily Bible reading, my thoughts, my questions, my revelations. Well, let's get this out of the way real quick.
Warning, Governor. The following commentary are the thoughts, questions, and revelations, but not in a charismatic sense, of the host of the Logical Christian podcast. Although the host a wise, revered, although not infallible sage-like individual attempts to do his due diligence in validating these thoughts, questions, and revelations, but not in a charismatic sense, before bringing them to you, the faithful listener, it is possible, although highly implausible, that he may be, although only the slightest bit in error. Please ensure you do your own research. We must all be Bereans. Should errors or questions arise, please contact the jovial, witty, and impeccably humble host with any and all comments. And just for the record, he totally didn't make me say any of this. No, really, these are my own personal absurd. No, I just can't do it. All right, Topper, let's be Bereans.
All right, so when we last met, we were in Deuteronomy, which is where we still are now, where Moses is recounting basically the entire Exodus to the Israelites right before they're to head into the Promised Land. Moses' life has nearly come to an end. He told them of his pleading with God to be allowed in, but God was not going to change his mind on that one. So let's keep working our way through Deuteronomy. Let's see what we can see now. Jumping ahead to chapter 9, an interesting comment, something that we all need to keep in mind, and I'll explain why in a second. So as Moses is talking to the Israelites about crossing the Jordan and moving into the Promised Land, and God crossing over before them as a consuming fire, destroying these fortified cities, the giants in the land, etc., etc., Moses says, quote, "Do not say in your heart when Yahweh your God has driven them out before you, saying, because of my righteousness Yahweh has brought me in to possess this land. But it is because of the wickedness of these nations that Yahweh is dispossessing them before you." He goes on to remind them that they are a stiff-necked people. It's always nice to hear that they've provoked God many times, but God is doing this because of God's choice, not because of how wonderful they are. Now, if you're saved, this is you. This is me. This is why I have to follow the Reformed or Calvinist belief system, which says that God is all sovereign, specifically with who his children, his elect, to use the word in the Bible, are. There is nothing good in me. I don't have a little bit of goodness where I could have chosen God, and neither did you. We were stiff-necked people, provoking God, hating God, because we didn't get our own way. We're enemies of God prior to salvation. God chose us for his reasons and his purpose, of which we really have no idea ultimately. I mean, sure, we may figure some of it out as we go through life, but really, we have no idea what God's reasoning was for saving you and me individually. The Israelites weren't anything special. They weren't better than the rest. In fact, they were downright terrible, to the point that God multiple times wiped out thousands of them, to the point that he allowed two people out of the entire nation that left Egypt to actually enter the promised land. In fact, from God's standpoint, those he was dispossessing of the land were no better than the Israelites, especially since he already knew how the Jewish nation would turn against him over and over and over again, just doing despicable things themselves. But God is sovereign. God's plan is set, and God's plan is perfect. God placed the Israelites in the promised land for the same reason he saved me and hopefully saved you, for his purpose and good pleasure. We should never puff ourselves up because we're saved, as it had nothing to do with us. If we actually had the choice to make, we would have chosen to stay lost, to keep God out of our lives. But God has his perfect plans and purpose. Moving forward to Deuteronomy 12, we see in verse 8 a phrase that I'd guess we're all familiar with, quote, "Every man doing whatever is right in his own eyes." But this isn't the location that I think most of us are familiar with for this particular saying. We typically think of it showing up in Judges, where it's said actually twice, in chapter 17 and in chapter 21. We normally point to chapter 21 because that is the final verse in the book of Judges. Quote, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." It's a very hopeless, very depressing way to end the chapter, to be honest. And the same phrase is stated the same way in the middle of Judges 17. We're talking about the same time frame here. But did you realize that this first appears in Deuteronomy? Now, it's not stated in the same context. Moses is talking about when they cross into the promised land, they completely take it over, Yahweh establishes himself there, then all of the laws, the festivals, the feasts, the sacrifices, the tithes, etc., shall be followed. Because as it stood as they wandered in the wilderness, although they had all of these laws and rules, every man was apparently doing what they felt was the right thing to do. Now, I've often wondered how they managed all the people, all the sacrifices, all the feasts, and so on and so forth, and it kind of sounds like maybe it was just a little unorganized, which would be very understandable, to be honest. But soon, they'd have specific locations to bring offerings, specific locations to offer sacrifices. It's just kind of interesting, at least I thought, that this phrase shows up, different context, and it kind of makes sense that maybe things were a little bit haphazard as they were trying to wander through the wilderness. Now, also at the end of chapter 12, we find one of the reasons that God was going to destroy these nations, a warning to the Israelites. Quote, "For every abominable act which Yahweh hates, they have done for their gods, for they even burn their sons and daughters in the fire to their gods." And here's the question. Are we any different? Here, today, America, are we any different? And not only are we sacrificing our unborn children to Satan through the abominable practice of abortion, but now we're sacrificing our born children to the transgender ideology, which is also satanic, and we're sacrificing their children to Satan by mutilating our children so as to sterilize them and make it so that they can't have children. What we're doing to our children is quite simply one of the detestable, abominable things that God wiped entire people groups off of the earth for. Are we so special that we think this can't happen to us? The softening of the Republican platform with regard to abortion is a road we should have never turned down. My hope and prayer is that if Trump is elected, and I hope and pray that he is, that after he's gone, we can get someone who moves back to the abolitionist position in the Republican Party with regard to abortion and child mutilation. God's patience with us, his very light judgment on this country currently, relatively speaking, won't last forever. I also find it amazing that in less than 900 years from the time of the flood, people groups moved, established, grew, and were already sacrificing babies to false gods. I mean, look, 900 years is a long time, granted, but is it really? I mean, when starting from ground zero, 900 years from a few people to a few people with a new language to a group of people that are now established worshiping idols, sacrificing children. Humanity is a depraved creature capable of great good and unfathomable evil. And moving into chapter 13, Moses warns the people of false prophets. He says, quote, "You shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams, for Yahweh your God is testing you to find out if you love Yahweh your God with all your heart and with all your soul." You ever wondered why God would allow all of these charlatans, false churches, false alleged prophets, health, wealth, prosperity preachers? Why would God allow the perverting of his church today, these mega churches with tens or hundreds of thousands of people all being lied to, all being taken in by some wolf? Well, here you go. Yahweh is testing us. Do we love him? Or do we love the preacher? Or the praise band? Or the emotion that we feel? Do we love God enough to open our Bibles and verify that what we're being told to believe is correct? Do we love Yahweh enough to leave a church we've gone to our entire lives because we've suddenly woken up and we've realized that all this time we've been bamboozled by some huckster flapping his arms around up front? In the developed nations, nations where we have Bibles everywhere, physically and electronically, how often are we opening them and reading? And that's probably a good place to stop here. Are we being Bereans? Do we love God enough to act as Bereans? Sadly, so many Christians or alleged Christians today don't. They just don't. It's too much of a bother. It's too boring. It's too difficult to read it. Why should I read? My pastor's a great pastor. This can't be us. It's interesting how much of what Moses was warning the Israelites about is the exact same stuff that, that we should really be taking to heart here, today, right now. All right. It's probably the right place to stop. It feels right. And feelings are really the most important thing, right? I'm pretty sure that's what it says in the Bible. You can trust me. Okay. As always, let me know what you think. Give me your feedback, ask questions, tell me what you're learning. But whatever you do, get up, get off your duff, and go be a Berean. And with that, sadly, we've reached the end of yet another episode of the Logical Christian Podcast. I feel we've bonded as we've laughed and cried and twisted our faces in incredulity. If you've enjoyed or found value in what you've heard, go on and do all the podcast things. And don't forget to check the show notes for links and contact info. Lawrence J. Peters said, "Against logic there is no armor like ignorance." Jesus told us that if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So stay in the word, stay logical, stay faithful, and until next time, God bless.